My first question here, Pastor Steve, is going to be, actually, I'm going to ask you about this. One of the big things in the media lately is the dossier on the Trump investigation. I wanted to ask you because I think it relates to your prophecy update. If you haven't, get online and check out his prophecy update. It's really, really awesome. There's a 2-part series, and I recommend that you watch that. Anyway, just to give them a rundown, one of the big points in your prophecy update was the morality of a nation, where it goes, there's a cycle, and then how that relates to the Bible and end times.
Right.
When you see, obviously you taught about on the whole subject, but when I look and I see people on social media looking at our country, when you have the top political force that's supposed to represent the people of America, so corrupt that it's into our judicial system, where do we go from here? Is there a recovery from this, or what happens as a nation and as Americans and as Christians when it's that bad? And I don't know if you want to talk about it, but it just seems so over the top. You know, it used to be like a offshoot conspiracy theory, some movie thing. To me, it's just wild. I never would have thought it would have been this crazy.
Yeah. You have situations in the Bible where the nation of Israel gets really corrupt, and then God brings in a righteous man, and they turn it around, go through and basically clean house. And so you have examples of that, like Josiah and Hezekiah. Josiah really notably just went through the whole land of Israel and got rid of anything that was pagan, anything that was corrupting the work of God in the land of Israel. And so there was a reprieve on the judgment that God brought down on the nation of Judah, specifically because of that. You have another one with Hezekiah, but his son ends up coming in being, the worst king of Judah that there ever was. And, literally had Isaiah sawn in half is what Manasseh did. And that guy at the end repents of all things. And so he tore the nation down. You know, when you get to a situation like this, I'm kind of I watch news a lot. And so I've been watching politics for a pretty long period of time. It started back in the 80s when I got interested because I kept getting opinions from different people on what was happening specifically with President Reagan. And so I'm the kind of guy that I'll go and listen to what the guys have to say. And so when I first noticed the junk that goes on in our political system and the media and that kind of thing, it happened when I would watch Reagan's speeches and then watch the news. You know, they're on the news. Mm-hmm. And so immediately after, they would have commentary on it. And I would literally be looking at the TV commentator going and wondering, did you watch the same speech I just watched? Because literally putting things into the guy's mouth and misrepresenting the things that he said and that kind of thing. And it was, like, watch the speech, now here's the commentary.
Yeah.
And it's like, do you think I'm an idiot? When you're doing that kind of stuff. And so it's just deteriorated from that point on to the point where in this last election cycle, you literally had news personalities giving candidates for election the questions before there would be a debate. Mm-hmm. And that kind of just total corruption as far as the news media goes. And the president actually one presidential candidate. And so that's upsetting. And then what happened during this last 8 years under Obama was there were increasing stories about things like the IRS going after people. And it wasn't just one person or two people, numerous people, as far as their political affiliation and denying them tax-exempt status or just slow-balling the whole thing, literally having people audited who didn't agree with the administration's politics, that kind of thing. You started hearing stories like that. And then we had situations where when President Trump was finally put into office, You had Justice Department officials who came out in resistance against him. One was fired. Turns out that she was involved in some of the mess that's happening right now. And so that's all scary stuff. You don't use the government to go after your political enemies. It's not supposed to be happening. And when that takes place, that gets really scary. That's communism. Right. That's third world dictators. That's that kind of thing. And we have a party that excuses that consistently. And I'm not saying that it's all confined to one group, but I think that any person that is involved in that should be fired and prosecuted. And I don't care who they are. And when it gets into the Justice Department and into the FBI, that's what we're dealing with now. That's a really scary thing. And I think that the people who are involved in that should be prosecuted. They should be fired. And again, I don't care who they are, and I don't care how long they've been there. One of the things that comes out anytime this kind of stuff comes on the scene is you have two sides going after it and giving their opinions on those things. And again, what I do when I run into that stuff, and I'm no absolute expert on this, but I try to get to the facts on something. I haven't watched a whole lot of commentary, news commentary, on the latest expose with the memos and stuff like that. What I did was I went to a website, found the memo, and read it. And the stuff that is in that memo, Comey should be, as far as I'm concerned, Comey should be prosecuted. Mm-hmm. And the assistant director of the FBI should be prosecuted. Everybody that's involved in that should be prosecuted. And it's scary to me that it went as far as it did. And one of the things that I watch for after the fact is whether or not the other side denies the facts of what's being stated. Right. And I haven't seen a denial yet. Right. What I've seen is spin. What I've seen is screaming about context. Even from the FBI, I haven't seen a denial. Right. And so the fact that there is no denial of the facts of the memo, that's scary stuff to me. When I read that, it started getting frightening. Yeah. To me at that point. That was pretty scary. You don't do that. And so basically what you had was a situation where the FBI knew that the so-called dossier was put together first by a Republican who abandoned it, and then taken up by the Democratic Party, who funded it through a shadow organization, which was a legal firm, and it got another organization that political appointees in the Justice Department were hooked in with. And when all that stuff came out, the FBI took that document that they knew was tainted. They knew that there was no real backup for it. They knew where it came from. They took it to a FISA court, which is a court that allows the surveillance of American citizens based on terrorism. That's what's happened since 9/11. Based on terrorism, took them to a FISA court and gave that stuff as being factual, and didn't tell them all the incidental stuffs that went with this, including the fact that they knew it to be false, mm-hmm. that they knew most of the allegations to be false, and literally given to the guy who put it together by the Russians. Mm-hmm. And so we do have Russian collusion. It just doesn't happen to be, nobody's proved it on the Trump side. It has been proved on the side of this dossier and everything that's connected with it. And so that whole thing is scary to me. And I think that basically what I think went on there was you have a bunch of bureaucrats who thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and that it didn't really matter what they did with Trump in this situation. And I didn't vote for the guy. And so I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool Trump supporter. I think that the stuff that he's done, I mean, he's kept his promises, and that's a new thing for me. Yeah. And but I didn't vote for the guy. Everything that was done to him was absolutely illegal. It was absolutely immoral. It was absolutely unethical. and the fact that that's all being clouded over by media outlets and groups and that kind of stuff is dangerous. It's not supposed to be happening. And so if they go through and I think, my attitude towards this is fire every bureaucrat in the government at this point and go through and rehire the good ones.
Yeah.
I don't know, just get rid of all of them. Clean house because I'm not a conspiracy guy, but this looks like nothing but conspiracy. And I think that these guys thought that they were going to get away with it because Hillary Clinton was going to be elected, and that they would even score brownie points because they did it. And that's nothing but corruption.
Right.
And so, biblically speaking, the people who are in governmental control are supposed to be servants to the people that are underneath them. That's biblically speaking, and that is also the Constitution of the United States. They're there to serve us, and that is not service. That's manipulation, and like I said, that's corruption. I'm pretty as soon as I read that, I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And apparently, there's going to be more coming out. If nothing happens with this, if it all gets swept under the rug, I think it's one of those indications that America is on a huge downward spiral. And if nothing comes from this, I think it's an indication of the fact that we're not going to be able to come back from it. It's just going to get more corrupt from this point on.
That's kind of my point, and I don't mean to be pessimistic or something. That's kind of my attitude, is that I don't expect anything to happen, because if you look, it seems like a political party will get in there, and then there's like a power vacuum. I don't know if that's because people get excited or they lost, and so they come out with more emphasis on the next one. But usually, it's like a 10-year Democrat, Republican, 5, whatever. But it's usually a back and forth thing on our democracy, constitutional republic, but democracy and the stuff that we vote. And so when you have one party that's doing that, and again, I did vote for Trump, but I really like his policy. I don't like his fat mouth, but when you have the possibility where those guys are going to be in office next time, I mean, where is the line drawn? Because back in the day, stuff like this, even though it was done, I think about Nixon and Watergate. To me, not even as big of a thing, and he resigned.
Yeah, what he resigned over, Nixon didn't plan the break-in at Watergate. What he resigned over was a cover-up. Mm-hmm. If he'd have come out and said a bunch of people made mistakes and I'm going to fire them, there would have been a big to-do about it. But what he did was he went out and he tried to cover the whole thing up, and that's what got him in problems. And that is not the case in this situation. This is a situation where you have number 1, number 2, and number 3 in the FBI,
right, who
are involved in this whole thing,
right,
and you've got high ups in the Justice Department that are involved in this whole thing, and that is messed up. And if those guys are involved in it, there's a really good chance that the president knew something about it. And if that's the case, then this should follow to Barack Obama, and if he's included in that whole thing, I think he should be prosecuted too. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, and then I was going to say the Clinton Foundation and stuff like that. It's almost a joke and political satire, because you have from an affair in the Oval Office all the way down to, I mean, how many different scandals were on the news during the election of all kinds of stuff tied to that. And now this, and nothing ever happens. They're continuing to be around. They're continuing to be up front and center in the DNC, or at least in part of politics in America. And I think goes to what you said, is like how much in a country that was founded based on principles of the Bible, God's in there numerous times, to go to this, how much more until God goes, okay, I'm done.
Yeah, I don't
it's
know.
Revival or judgment, right?
Yeah, I think so. This needs to be cleaned up. And so I don't see. I mean, when you're looking at what the Bible has to say about where Israel was in the last days, it was exactly this kind of stuff. Right. There was political corruption, and that's not even the worst of it. The thing that really got the nation of Israel thrown out of the land was the butchering of their children, and the Bible talks about them having their children pass through the fire. They were literally killing babies, and it had to do with their immorality. They were into sexual immorality as far as their worship went. They had literally had temple prostitutes, and these women would get pregnant, and they didn't want to have the babies. Many times they were married, and they didn't want to have you would be involved in this temple prostitution, and many times the people who are involved in it are married women and men, and they would have babies from those things, and the babies would end up getting slaughtered. And so those were usually the children that were killed in ritual sacrifice. And so literally these guys have a society where sex is king, and when they get the consequences of immoral sexual activity, what they do is they burn the babies. And it's no different than what we've got going on in the United States. And so when I look at the major judgment factors that the United States has, corruption is pretty low down on the list.
Yeah, I guess.
There's a lot of other stuff that's going on that God should be judging the United States for. We're talking about literally millions of babies.
Well, on that note,
40 to 50 million children.
And they just passed that thing or they denied the past 20 weeks abortion thing just recently.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
When you look at Europe's laws against abortion, they're more strict than the United States. Mm-hmm. It's crazy. This is craziness. So yeah, we got a lot of problems in the United States. We need to be praying for our country and praying for our politicians, and obviously praying for our bureaucrats that God does something here. And so I think that right before judgment comes, God just shines the light on the darkness that's taken place in a country, so that it can be clearly seen. And then you get to do what you want with that. And so you can go with it and make excuses for it, or you can come out against it and basically do what Scripture has to say about those things. You don't tie yourself up with people who are wicked. And so again, I don't care who they are. And if it was a Republican that was doing this nonsense, actually they're more accountable, because when you're talking about the Republican Party, they're constantly throwing out God and the Bible, throwing forward God and the Bible and conservative principles and Judeo-Christian ethic. And when a Republican is caught up in stuff like this, they're even more accountable than the party that just goes through and excuses this nonsense all the time. But both parties are accountable, and I think people should go to jail. Yeah. So.
All right.
But
enough of that.
We're in the last days, man.
We definitely live in interesting times. There's no doubt about that.